Is there some simply serendipitous value in being wrong? We're going to evaluate that a little bit today with the poem in question. We are here to talk about The Man-Moth by Elizabeth Bishop. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for a poetry discussion, which will appear, of course, in the poetry discussion playlist here on the channel, now approaching 700 videos strong. That's right, nearly one poetry discussion video every day for 2 years. You could do one poetry discussion every day for almost 2 years, and you would not run out. In fact, by the time you get to that 2 year mark, I guarantee you, I am over the was that 730 mark. So anyway, The Man-Moth by Elizabeth Bishop. Man-Moth, newspaper misprint for Mammoth. And it reads as such. Here, above, cracks in the building are filled with battered moonlight. The whole shadow of man is only as big as his hat. It lies at his feet like a circle for a doll to stand on, and he makes an inverted pin, the point magnetized to the moon. He does not see the moon. He observes only her vast properties, feeling the queer light on his hands, neither warm nor cold, of a temperature impossible to record with thermometers. But when the man-moth pays his rare, although occasional, visits to the surface, the moon looks rather different to him. He emerges from an opening at the edge of one of the sidewalks and nervously begins to scale the faces of the buildings. He thinks the moon is a small hole at the top of the sky, proving the sky quite useless for his protection. I'm going to highlight that real quick, sorry. He trembles, but must investigate as high as he can climb, up the facades, his shadow dragging like a photographer's cloth behind him. He climbs fearfully, thinking that this time he will manage to push his small head through that round, clean opening and be forced through, as from a tube, in black scrolls on the light. Man standing below him, no such illusions. But what the man-moth fears most he must do, although he fails, of course, and falls back, scared but quite unhurt. Then he returns to the pale subways of cement he calls his home. He flits, he flutters, he cannot get aboard the silent trains fast enough to suit him. The doors close swiftly. The man-moth always seats himself facing the wrong way, and the train starts at once its full, terrible speed, without a shift in gears or a gradation of any sort. He cannot tell the rate at which he travels backwards. Each night he must be carried through artificial tunnels and dream recurrent dreams, just as the ties recur beneath his train. These underlie his rushing brain. He does not dare look out the window for the third rail. The unbroken draft of poison runs there beside him. He regards it as a disease he has inherited the susceptibility to. He has to keep his hands in his pockets, as others must wear mufflers. If you catch him, hold up a flashlight to his eye. It's all dark pupil, an entire night itself, whose haired horizon tightens as he stares back and closes up the eye. Then, from the lids, one tear, his only possession, like the bee's sting, slips. Slyly he palms it, and if you are not paying attention, he'll swallow it. However, if you watch, he'll hand it over, cool as from an underground spring, pure enough to drink. Weird poem, wild poem. One would be tempted to say an inexplicable poem, and maybe that's true. But there is something in our setup here that I want to talk about, and it is in the poem as well. So if we go back to the top here, Man-Moth, newspaper misprint for Mammoth. So there was this misunderstanding between the story as it was transcribed and the story that made its way to the readers. Elizabeth Bishop took that mistranslation and ran with it. You could say that this is a misinterpretation of sorts. It is a misinterpretation, maybe not from the reader's end, but a misinterpretation of the words as they were supposed to be typed to the words that were typed. And then this entire poem, the point of this entire poem, the reason for the Man-Moth's journey. He thinks the moon is a small hole at the top of the sky, proving the sky quite useless for protection. He trembles but must investigate as high as he can climb. His entire journey here is based upon misinterpretation. If you've been here for any amount of time, you might know where I'm about to go. The anxiety of influence. A Theory of Poetry is a 1973 book by Harold Bloom on the anxiety of influence in writing poetry. It was the first in a series of books that advanced new, revisionary, or antithetical approach to literary criticism. Bloom's central thesis is that poets are hindered in their creative process by the ambiguous relationship they necessarily maintain with precursor poets. While admitting the influence of extra literary experience on every poet, he argues that the poet, in a poet, is inspired to write by reading another poet's poetry and will tend to produce work that is in danger of being derivative of existing poetry and therefore weak. Now, in writers' circles, everyone knows this. You're reading too much Hemingway, you'll write bad Hemingway. You're reading too much Faulkner, you'll write bad Faulkner. You will have to develop your own voice, and therefore weak, because poets historically emphasize an original poetic vision in order to guarantee their survival into posterity. The influence of the precursor poets inspires a sense of anxiety in living poets. Thus, Bloom attempts to work out the process by which the small minority of strong poets manage to create original work in spite of the pressure of influence. Such an agon, a vain attempt by a writer to resolve the conflict between his ideas and those of a much more influential predecessor, Bloom argues depends on 6 revisionary ratios, which reflect Freudian and quasi-Freudian defense mechanisms, as well as tropes of classical rhetoric. Now, we're not going to get into all of that, but I think that it is an interesting tidbit here from Bloom to say that artists are afraid of their predecessor artists influencing their work too much. You don't want to be the short story writer who just writes bad Hemingway. You don't want to be the poet who just writes bad Bukowski. The interesting thing is, if you have some perverse interpretation of what that artist does, you basically can. If, in my mind, what Bukowski is doing is highlighting the differences between a rough, lower class lifestyle and a high class existence. If that's my understanding of Bukowski, all Bukowski is class struggle, class warfare. If that's my interpretation of Bukowski, and my interpretation of Bukowski has nothing to do with the cigars, has nothing to do with the cursing, has nothing to do with the short line breaks, I can write Bukowski very poorly and it will seem like someone else. It will seem like me. If my understanding of Ernest Hemingway is that his speakers are not as tough as they want to come across. That all of his speakers, and this is something that has kind of happened to Hemingway in the years since he passed. If I think that his speakers are all machismo and bravado, but I'm a woman, and I want to write Hemingway, I can write bad Hemingway by taking that voice of the machismo, putting it in a woman, and making that protagonist unsure of themselves. Because the bravado, the machismo there, whether it's a man or a woman, is most often for show, is most often a defense mechanism. So, if you have a braggadocious female protagonist or female speaker in a short story, braggadocious female speaker in a short story who is actually insecure. Well, we have a lot of those stories now, I would say, but we didn't at the time Hemingway was writing. So if you had beaten the market to the punch, you could have written those short stories. If my interpretation of Faulkner, what could be an interesting interpretation of Faulkner? If my interpretation of Faulkner was that Faulkner was a storyteller's storyteller, which I think he is, and he was telling the stories of the South the way that they can only be told in the South, but I was from the Northwest, I could write bad Faulkner by saying I want an authentic Seattle voice, telling Seattle stories in ways that only a Seattleer, Seattleanese could tell them. You would pick subjects that you can only find in Seattle, and you would bring out the humanity from those situations. It's a homeless encampment. Maybe I'm just judging, but you get where I'm going. Tell me as I lay dying that story in a Seattle homeless encampment. Oh, baby, I'm all ears. Right? I'm there for you. I would argue that in a little ways, kind of Tom Spanbauer might be that guy, but I think that the idea here is based on misinterpretation. The misinterpretation of Mammoth into Man-Moth, the misinterpretation by the Man-Moth of believing that the moon is a hole in the sky that needs to be observed. The fact that this is all meta, right on top of a dollop of Harold Bloom saying that kind of all art is contingent upon misinterpretation is very, very interesting to me. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. Dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.